there. Okay, so let's get started. So just a few things to note before we begin. This session is being recorded, and the recordings will be available 2 weeks after the event. And you can use the chat box and the Q&A box on the right hand of the screen to ask questions and engage with other attendees. And please take the survey pinned at the top of the chat box at the session's close. And welcome to today's session about composting. I'm Michelle Tulac, and I work at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, where we develop and promote the idea of a circular economy. And we work with business, academia, policymakers, and institutions to mobilize systems solutions at scale globally. And we have a wonderful group of experts here to talk about composting. And I'm delighted to be joined by Ryan Cooper, the Director of Circular Economy Solutions at Rubicon and the Organics Recycling Lead. In his role, he's responsible for designing, implementing, and managing thousands of organic recycling programs across the US and Canada. We're also joined by Jorge Montezuma, who leads the site design and regulatory compliance for Atlas Organics, a compost manufacturing company. He's a licensed professional engineer and draws from 10 years of composting experience working across the country in the public and private sectors. And we're joined by Nora Goldstein, editor and publisher of Biocycle Connect and Biocycle.net, the Organics Recycling Authority. Nora is in her 5th decade of working at Biocycle, which provides a foundation for prognosticating what the nation needs when it comes to composting and compost utilization. Welcome, Nora, Jorge, and Ryan.
Thank you.
So in a circular economy, food is grown, processed, transported, prepared, and managed in ways that benefit the health of people and natural systems. In our current food systems, food that's produced but not eaten still requires many resources to grow, harvest, transport, cool, cook, and prepare. So it's really important to find the highest and best use for any remaining food and food scraps in order to capture the nutrients, the embedded energy, and other residual value. And we can make the most of food by turning the remaining uneaten or inedible byproducts into new products like compost. And research has shown that the addition of compost to food-growing soils can produce higher yields with better nutritional values, energized through improved plant metabolism. And not only that, enriched and healthy soils protect habitats, improve air and water quality, build resilience, and can sequester carbon. So composting is a critical solution in the set of solutions needed to address food waste and help build healthy soil. So today we'll talk about some key interventions that can help scale progress. Nora, Jorge, and Ryan, you all have deep expertise and experience in this space, so let's dig in. This first question is for all of you, so feel free to just jump in. Help us understand the landscape a little bit more. When we're talking about building compost infrastructure, what are we talking about? Large facilities or community composting or some combination?
This is Nora. I'm going to lead off just because I looked up a piece of data, and it's our survey data is a teeny bit old, but roughly there are 4,700 to 5,000 composting facilities in the US, and about 5% are taking food waste. So it's out of the landscape of what's out there for infrastructure. And with most of the interest these days focused on food waste composting, I just wanted to offer up that perspective. And interestingly, and I'm curious if Jorge and Ryan would agree, I think some of the biggest growth we're seeing is in the decentralized composting, smaller scale facilities. And one reason for that is in a number of states now, smaller scale facilities have an easier time in terms of permitting. They're often exempt or have less stringent permits. And we like to think of these kind of facilities as feeder facilities for larger scale, both for those operators, but also feeding into operations like what Atlas runs. So I just wanted to paint that picture to get us started.
Yeah, I'll add a couple of things. I think we're talking about a combination of things. We're talking about community composting, we're talking about large-scale composting, and to visualize a little bit like what it is that we're talking about is we're going beyond backyard composting. Typically, backyard composting is very limited to some organic waste that won't attract vectors. So typically you're not recommended to compost animal byproducts or some other things that may mess with the chemistry of the small composting pile. So we're talking about community composting sites that are located in urban farms or in community gardens that may be managed by a group of volunteers, maybe with a small skid steer. And we're also talking about the medium and large scale facilities, and we're talking about acres of a flat-ish area that's sloping to one spot to collect any of the storm water, any of the contact water. And you're seeing piles that are taller than all of us, or maybe about our height. And we're talking about, sometimes thousands and thousands of cubic yards of material on the ground with large equipment moving the materials from one side to the other side that are managing a number of different feedstocks like yard waste, food waste, maybe biosolids, maybe industrial food waste byproducts, and some other organic waste streams that may be coming on the line. So I think for our particular discussion, I feel like we may be gearing a little bit more towards the medium and large scale. So we're talking about larger spaces, but definitely in general, we need a combination of both. Like Nora mentioned, the quote unquote maybe feeder spaces that are really great at community engagement and teaching people like what is going on, because a lot of people have no idea what really happens after you put something in any bin, whether it's a trash bin, a recycling bin, or a composting bin.
That's great insights. And so starting at the bin, from my perspective, I'm mostly dealing with commercial businesses that have an organic stream. So let's, for the purposes of this conversation, call it food scraps. For those types of businesses, in order for them to have a bin in the first place, there has to be a permitted facility in the area. A lot of food scraps are generated on the residential level. And to Jorge's point, even in the best of circumstances where folks do have backyards and they are willing to do backyard composting, there could still be, yard waste and food waste streams that are not applicable for backyard composting. So again, from my perspective, focusing mostly on commercial businesses, in order for companies to be able to recycle their organics and put material in a bin, there has to be a facility first. And so one of the biggest conversations that we have is, well, how can we get more facilities so that more locations, not just more companies, but more locations within a company's footprint are able to participate in those programs. So I think that that's why we're talking about the need for increased infrastructure, is because in order for people to recycle their organics, there has to be these permitted facilities.
Great, and you spoke a little bit about some of the permitting that goes into this. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what the siting process entails.
I can kick off this one. So in every location is going to be different, which makes this a super fun process, very educational at all levels. You would typically start at the local level to figure out what does the city, what does the county, what does the township require, and then work your way up to the state. So typically you have a local permitting process and a county and a state permitting process. There may be different offices within each one that have to give you different permits if you're building a new space or if you are taking over an existing space. You may have to deal with the planning office, with the engineering office, with the stormwater office, with the health office. And at the state level, in general, you're going to deal with maybe 3 offices, which is the solid waste division, the air quality division, and the water management division. Those are the ones that typically get involved in places where the air is generally clean, water's generally clean. You may only have to deal with solid waste and maybe a little bit with water management. And it can take anywhere between a few months to a few years, depending on where you are. In California, the typical permitting process, it can be 5 years, and that's at the state level, which includes a local approval as well. In some other places, if you're revamping existing infrastructure, it may be just a few months. We permitted a facility within a wastewater treatment plant within 6 months, which was extremely quick. But it was because we're using existing infrastructure. If it were a greenfield, it would have taken us, I would say, at least a year, maybe 2 years.
I'd just like to add to that. One of the things that we hope to see more of, and we just haven't for a host of reasons, is with the existing yard trimmings composting capacity, is to be able to start incorporating food waste streams. And some states do encourage that, again, through their regulations. It's a bad word to say encourage, because states are always very hesitant, but it facilitated, it makes it a little easier. And I'll put a link to a guide that we helped put together on what it takes to add food scraps to yard trimmings composting facilities, because food scraps, as we like to say, don't degrade gracefully. So they need more attention than leaves and brush might need. I just want to jump back one step when Ryan was describing, and Jorge, the composting facilities. For the commercial and institutional sector, we're seeing more food waste streams going to anaerobic digesters and being put through pre-processing equipment that creates a slurry that they then add. So we're seeing infrastructure for those streams increasing at wastewater treatment plants and farm digesters, and a handful of just food waste digesters. That doesn't seem to be as regulated as composting facilities, and some work that we recently did surveying state permitting requirements.
Ryan, I would love to hear from you about generators that are looking into on-site composting solutions, which is popular, and I feel like some people can do it well, but I feel like there's also sometimes a big challenge to have the staff from those companies operate those machines and be able to do it well. Are you finding that any companies are looking for those solutions or entertaining those ideas?
So, my perspective, to be clear, Rubicon does not own or operate any composting facilities, but the way that I, wound up here was developing an on-site facility at a site that I was working at. We've got customers, very few that have the space necessary. And the ones that do have the space and the feedstock, I think they are hesitant about that labor piece because there is an operational part of this. So, to kind of expand on what a facility means, it's a manufacturing process. And so there is very active component of managing the facilities. Now, we could talk about the different types of facilities. There's in-vessel, there's aerated static pile, there's open windrows, there's completely enclosed facilities. All of these differences are very important, but most of our customer base does not have the space or the appetite to manage their materials on site. And so then when you're talking about an offsite material, and my only input to the permitting question is really just that it's extremely important not just to talk about the permitting and the actual siting, finding that piece of land, but also the neighbors and the surrounding community, because it's not just what's officially on the books as far as laws go. The community has to be supportive of the facilities, which to be 100% honest, many people look at composting facilities as, solid waste facilities, trash dumps, if you will. There's truck traffic. So, all it takes is one neighbor that calls, the police department and the fire department and the mayor and everybody else to really, threaten the existence of these composting facilities. So, it's just another thing to consider. In addition to the permitting, is that community engagement piece as well, to show people why these facilities are important, that they do create sustainable green jobs, that it's not like a landfill where you fill it, you cap it, and it's over. These are materials that have to constantly be cycled year over year, and will create those long-term employment opportunities.
Makes a lot of I think, we'll shift gears a little bit and talk about the role of policy. Definitely want to talk about business viability, but you mentioned the communities, and so that raises important issues around land use and responsible land use. So let's dig in a bit more into the role of policy and government. So how can policy, partnerships, and regulations set those enabling conditions for composting to happen, and to happen in a responsible manner? And that's open question for whoever wants to jump in.
So I'll start just to warm these guys up a little. One thing I've been thinking about, because one of the benefits and disadvantages of doing this for well over 40 years is you've seen a lot of potential opportunities to drive the need for infrastructure, and then you see them get squashed. And the most vivid example is back in the late 80s, when there were regulations going into place, federal regulations around landfills that would close substandard landfills. And we really thought, there's no way places are going to want to haul their trash distance. And so they're going to source separate, and they're going to compost and recycle. That was a very bad assumption, and which is why so much of, at least in the Northeast region, a lot of trash gets hauled around great distances. So what I've come to just landed on fairly recently is, are we in or are we not? Do we want these resources to be used for higher and better purposes, or do we just want to keep slugging it out with landfills and whatnot? And so to me, a very key piece of policy is a framing where, no, we shouldn't be putting source separated clean organics in the landfill. We need the byproducts that are made with the end products that are made with those materials desperately for our soils, for water, helping with healthy soils is clean water, and healthy soils grows healthy food, and on and on. And there's just not enough of it to squander. So that's my soapbox, and I'm going to hand it over.
I'll speak of two things, North Carolina and California, without going too in depth, which are two places where I've worked in the composting industry. In North Carolina, I was working for the state, and I got a chance to study the activity in composting. So and in the early I think it was in 1993, yard waste was banned from landfills, and that really helped to speed up the yard waste composting sites. A lot of trees, a lot of municipalities, a lot of small sites where yard waste is collected and ground up. It seems like a few of them started collecting food waste, but that was more on the private side. And they did it really well without any food waste mandates. In general, North Carolina has a really healthy ecosystem. I would say the few, couple different core urban cores have access to it, but we definitely need more. California, on the other hand, you could say that it's more progressive on the environmental side of food waste and composting, etc. The SB 1383 just was implemented, etc. In general, the composters there are a little bit scared about everything that's going to come and all the requirements on at the county level to make sure that all this food is diverted. I think it's going to create a lot of really good things. There's going to be some chaos trying to scramble to set up these facilities. There may be a lot of contamination that comes in because now all of a sudden everybody has to compost and everybody has to put in everything on these bins, and there's going to have to be a lot of education, and education is really hard when you're just trying to have everybody do it. It's hard enough to have people that want to do it be well educated on what not to put in the bin, let alone people who really may not really care too much, what's in that bin. But it can be helpful, and we can also see some challenges as well.
Yeah, so using those two scenarios that Jorge just mentioned, you've got a state where it's up to the private sector to identify opportunities, build these facilities, and and there are municipal opportunities as well. But basically, there's not what we kind of generally call shorthand, a food waste ban or some sort of regulation around whether food waste can go into the landfill or not. Generally, there's limits on amount that companies generate and per week and distance from facilities. So they vary state to state, but California is a state where there is regulation in place to drive those organics away from the landfill. And so you're hearing Jorge's on the ground reaction, which is that in California, it's kind of unique because they aim specifically at the jurisdictions to figure this out. But basically, you've got the infrastructure trying to figure out and scramble how they're going to make this work. You got the cities, the counties, the state trying to figure out how this is going to work. But they're working to try to solve this issue. Whereas when there's not regulation in place, which is the vast majority, of the country, it's really up to municipalities or the private sector that wants to go it alone. And so one of the things that, we can talk about is the economics, but in order to build a facility, it's helpful to know that the feedstock will come to you. And in order to build that facility, if there is a mandate and you can sort of rest assured that by law material has to come to you, that's a completely different scenario than basically trying to compete in an open market against landfills, incineration, and many other different processes as well. So it's those are two vastly different things, but we are seeing more and more cities, counties, states adopt some sort of regulation that is driving that material to go somewhere, and for that scramble that Jorge mentioned of people trying to figure out how we're going to deal with it.
Great. And so building off of that, when there's confidence that that material is coming in and there's some policy drivers to support that, how do we ensure that what's coming out, so the final product, the compost, has a place to go? So let's talk a bit about the economics. So we know that long-term contracts can be really helpful. We know that public-private partnership can be really helpful. But tell us a little bit about how you actually go about marketing, distributing, and selling that compost. What's the business case and what needs to be true to make that work?
I'll kick it off. I may expand on the conversation a little bit. I do engineering, not sales, but I've been broad enough and talked to my coworkers who sell compost and who have to find homes enough to understand what goes on. And piggybacking on some of the questions that are coming in as well, and what Ryan just mentioned too, I think so. Regulations can definitely help to make sure that if we're looking at, so we're the opposite of the oil divestment movement. Sorry, I also just wanted to add that. I kind of thought about this earlier. We are in the, if anybody wants to shift away from oil, I feel like organics recycling is the next frontier in a way. And in order to to help make sure that we can get those feedstocks, we do need regulations, we do need long-term agreements, we do need to find maybe companies who blend materials. Maybe they blend sand and clay and maybe vermiculite or some other things with compost so that they can take the majority of our products and create higher end products for nurseries or for other businesses. That's one way to ensure that those markets are found. To create a good product, you have to have a good, consistent process, and the quality is really going to depend on who uses it. So quality is going to really depend on if it's an orchard, if it's a vineyard, if it's a nursery, if it's a landscaper. And I highly recommend that everybody that's looking into buying compost or making compost to look into the U.S. Composting Council Seal of Testing Assurance Program. But I'll stop there with maybe expanding on that question.
Well, anything you want to add to that, Nora?
I just want to add a little bit to when Jorge said, when you say the quality of the compost, it depends on the market. I think part of that is if you're doing one thing for just to sort of quickly paint the landscape. So many composting manufacturers do soil blending. So it's a blend of compost and other materials. So if you're doing a golf course blend versus a landscape blend, versus top dressing, lawns and whatnot. But what's key is the compost has to have a certain degree of stability and maturity. And so if it's going into an application where vegetating isn't instantly necessary, it's maybe doesn't have to be quite as mature as if you're putting it in a potting mix. So one of the things, and I see some questions in here regarding compostable products and packaging that we see as a solution or a way to solve is right now contamination from single-use packaging and film plastics and other items made with conventional plastic products is a huge issue for composting facilities. And so certified compostable products are definitely an alternative. But there's a whole series of sort of if this, then it's good, if this, then it's good. And I'll post a link quickly into the chat with the Biodegradable Products Institute and Biocycle did a stakeholder workshop series back in the beginning of the year. And there's a roadmap in there that really identifies some hurdles. And I'll stop there and get the link.
Michelle, to answer your question very directly on the economics of composting and sales, generally composting facilities are seeing the revenues coming about, I would say 60 to 80% from the feedstocks that come into the facility and the rest from the sales of composting. And sometimes it all comes in on the feedstock side and they just give it away for free. But I just wanted to add that general perspective on the economies.
We're almost done. We just have a couple minutes left, and we're looking in the chat, trying to incorporate some of the questions that came through into our discussion. There's some great resources in there, so please take a look and check out the links that have been shared. In our final moment, thank you, first of all, Jorge, Nora, and Ryan. You've provided really valuable insights. Please, if you're willing to get in touch with others, share your contact information in the chat, and you can follow up more directly. But as we're wrapping up, what are some final takeaways that you would like organizations to know if they want to tap into the space? We'll go rapid fire.
I will say this is a super fast session. I really appreciate it. I would say everybody has a role to play at all levels. So get in touch with the city to demand services, talk to restaurants. If you're in a position to purchase compost, purchase compost. Look into upgrading existing yard waste systems to accept food waste, and read Biocycle and attend the next composting conference in January?
I'll just add in that there is no good excuse for a poorly run composting facility. The technologies are very evolved. The practices are very involved. There's plenty of tires to go kick. So if you're considering getting into this or using composting facilities, go visit some facilities. They're outside, so they're fairly COVID safe. Thank you for this opportunity.
Yep, I'd echo what everybody else said. It's amazing honor to be with the speakers and moderator today. Posted some links on the chat. If you're a municipality, check out the brand new Target Organics Hub on the U.S. Composting Council website. If you're a company that would like to get involved, there's the Corporate Compost Leadership Council that is also part of the U.S. Composting Council. Jorge put the link into the U.S. Composting Council conference, which I highly recommend attending. And, if you're interested in composting, please check out the local resources, find out who is doing it in your area. And yep, I put my LinkedIn there. So please feel free to connect if you'd like to find out more. So thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.